Hello, everyone out there. So it's actually nighttime here for me. There's some shadows in the back, if you see. And before we hop into our next chapter, which is a tough one, it's a real tough one, we got to go back and review real quickly. So let's get to the review. Now, if you remember, Hector was seriously wounded by the Greeks, almost potentially even going to die because they were aided by Poseidon, who is the lord of the ocean and the earthquake, and he was really helping out the Greeks. But then Zeus is like, no, no, no. He calls on Apollo, who's the sun god, and he says, breathe some life back into Hector, get him pumped up again. And that's exactly what happens. Hector has the spirit of the gods in him, so he's really excited. He pushes, with some help from others, the Greeks all the way back to their ships, and they're fighting and killing these Greeks, and they actually lit fire to their fleet, or their group of ships. So that's where they're at right now. And at the end of the chapter, Patroclus, who is Achilles' best friend, he sees these ships just blazing. That's what we end with. So what's he going to do, basically? So the next chapter is called the Armor of Achilles. Here we go. With his heart sick and hammering within him, Patroclus ran for the camp of the Myrmidons, which the fighting had not yet reached, and the ship where his lord Achilles awaited him. So the Myrmidons are people that are fighting under Achilles and his group. Crying, Patroclus? Said his lord when he reached the prow of the ship. Like a girl child that runs pulling at her mother's skirts to be picked up? Is your father dead? Or mine? Or do you weep for the Greeks dying beside their ships in payment for their own folly, for their own error or mess up? Patroclus said, it is not for their own folly that they die, but for the ill-doing of one man. And he has already offered you full amends, which you have refused. So, he's talking about Agamemnon there. And as he spoke, old wise Nestor's words returned to him. If you have some reason unknown to us which forbids your return to the fighting, then lend me your armor and your chariot and horses, and let me lead out the Myrmidons in your stead, in your place. The Trojans will think that you yourself came against them, and so lose heart. And 2,000 well-rested warriors may yet turn the fortunes of the fight. Then the grief rose in Achilles that he had sworn not to rejoin the war host until Hector brought fire and sword to his own ships. But this one thing he could do. Take then my armor and my horses, he said, and lead the Myrmidons out in my seeming. Drive the Trojans back, lest they fire all our ships and so destroy our road home behind us. But when you have driven them clear of the ships, do not give chase, but return here to me. So Patroclus promised, and while Achilles himself summoned his war bands, he put on the splendid armor which all the Trojans knew and feared from the time before Achilles' quarrel with Agamemnon. Automedon, the prince's charioteer, yoked his two immortal horses Xanthus and Balus, who had been fathered by the west wind, and put the mortal horse Pedasus, who was as swift and valiant as they, in the side traces. And the Myrmidons, eager as a pack of wolves for the fighting that had been so long denied them, formed themselves into companies and made ready their spears. So the other fighters are really pumped up. They're like, listen, Achilles doesn't want to fight, but we really want to fight. So they're pumped. Then Patroclus mounted into the chariot and, in close array, shield touching shield behind him, they charged out against the Trojans. Down they came on the enemy flank, and the Trojans saw the armor and horses of Achilles thundering in the lead, and their hearts lurched and sickened within them. So they're looking out and they're seeing Achilles. They basically think, oh, that's Achilles out there with all of his fighters. But Achilles did not see their charge, for he was in his hall. He brought out wine in an ancient gold-worked goblet and poured it, red as blood, on the dry earth before the threshold, and prayed to the All-Father. Lord Zeus, send glory with him, strengthen the heart within him, and when he has driven the fighting back from the ships, let him return to me unharmed and his sword companions with him. And Zeus heard the prayer and granted one half of it, and refused the other. I'll show you the picture in a moment. Shouting to the Myrmidons to follow, Patroclus was crashing in among the Trojans round the ships, slaying as he went, hurling back the flame bearers, thrusting after them as they weaved and gave ground and streamed away. And in a while the ships were clear and the fires quenched, and the Trojans, out once more beyond the ditch that was now jagged with broken chariots, their horses flying loose across the plain. After them, the horses of Achilles cleared the ditch, and Patroclus flung them forward to come between the Trojans and the walls of their own city, cutting them off and herding them back toward the ranks of the Greeks, who were hastily making ready to receive them. Many men he slew, or killed, on foot and in chariots. Chief among them all was Sarpedon, lord of the Lycians and leader of all the Trojan allies. And in the place where Sarpedon fell, the Trojans under Hector rallied about his body, and the fight swirled to and fro until at last the Greeks gained possession of it and stripped it of its splendid armor and rejoiced. Here's a picture of all the fighting going on. But Sarpedon was son to Zeus by a mortal mother, and in that same moment his body was gone from under their hands, no man knowing how or where. For at his father's order the twin brothers Sleep and Death came unseen on their great wings and bore him away to his own land for burial among his own people. So it seems mystically or magically the body gets taken off. Now, with the Trojans clear of the ships, Patroclus should have remembered the orders of his prince and turned back. But Zeus, the cloud gatherer, angry for the death of his son, had put the battle rage into him so that he forgot all things else. So he's fighting so hard, and it looks like Zeus is putting things in his head. He doesn't turn back to go back to Achilles. Shouting to Automedon, his charioteer, he raced on, slaying as he went, outstripping the Myrmidons until, alone, he reached the walls of Troy. So he's out there in the front with his sword. And in his battle madness, 3 times he tried to climb the great stones, and 3 times was beaten back. Hector, in his chariot in the Scaean gateway, bade his charioteer drive straight for Achilles, for the man in Achilles' armor. And Patroclus, standing at the foot of the wall, caught up a great stone and flung it at Hector, whoosh, but missed him, and slew his charioteer instead. And 3 times after that, Patroclus charged into the thick of the Trojan battle mass, each time killing 9 men, and always the Myrmidons charging at his heels behind him. And who shall say how the day might have ended? But when he charged a 4th time, the Lord Apollo came up behind him, no man seeing him, and struck him between the shoulders, so that his eyes darkened, and the great helmet fell from his head and rolled clanging under the hooves of the chariot horses. And men saw his face, that he was Patroclus and not Achilles. His spear shattered and the great shield dropped from his shoulder to the ground. In the circling fight, a Trojan warrior came from behind and drove a spear into his back. Then, as Patroclus, with a red mist darkening before his eyes, shortened his spear in his hand and struggled to come at his attacker, Hector came from in front and speared him in the belly, driving the bronze blade right through his body so that he pitched down and the red mist turned black and his life tore free and fled away. But with his last breath he spoke to great Hector standing over him. Death stands close to you also, here in this same gate, and at the hand of the Lord Achilles, whose armor I wear. And there was a breath of silence all about them, for it was known that dying men see far. Patroclus was dead, and Hector stripped the armor from his body, the armor that had been Achilles' and was a gift from the gods. And drawing a little aside from the fighting, he put it on in place of his own, which he sent back into the city for an offering to Athena. Then he plunged back into the struggle that was raging round the champion's naked body. All through the hot noontime, the struggle for possession of the body went on. the Trojans seeking to carry it away and fling it to the dogs in the city, the Greeks to bear it back to the ships for honorable burial. Automedon, who had served Patroclus as charioteer, could not join his comrades in the fight at first for the 2 chariot horses of Achilles, but Acis, the mortal trace horse, was dead by this time, stood with bowed heads and wept for their lord's friend who had been dear to them through the long years of the siege. So it seems even the horses are like, they're sad. They would not move from the spot, either to draw clear of the fighting or to join in. But Zeus saw their grief and, for the sake of their father, the west wind, put fire back into their hearts and power into their legs and their arched necks. And then Automedon found himself another warrior to be his charioteer and, with him, plunged back into the struggle. I'm going to hold this up here. As you can see, that's the body of Patroclus being kind of carried away there, or fought for at that point. But little by little, as the sun passed overhead and arched down the sky, the battle began to go against the Greeks. They began to give ground, the Trojans thrusting after. Yet the Myrmidons did not abandon the slain body of Patroclus, but bore it with them, or took it with them, battered and torn like an old cloak, clotted with blood and battle dust, back toward the ships, while Ajax and his companions covered their retreat with broad shields and darting spears. Yikes. That's it for this chapter. This is a tough one. That's a real tough one in my eyes. I mean, Patroclus is gone. I can only imagine what's going to happen with Achilles when he hears about this. I mean, oh my gosh. Okay, so a question. I'm going to give you one question and a face on this. Thinking about Patroclus taking on that armor, why do you think the men would fight differently if they think that Achilles is in the battle? Like, what is it about Achilles? I mean, is there something like this? Have you ever been in a game or a match or something where there's one person who's really, really good? And what does it do to you when that person's in the battle? So why would the other side fight differently if Achilles was in the battle, or the person they thought was Achilles was in the battle? And then in terms of a face, why don't we let's do a Myrmidon. So, a fighter under Achilles' group, taking Patroclus' body away. So fighting for it and then finally getting it and kind of like just carrying it out. So let's go with carrying it out, okay? So that's my face. That's a little bit serious. I mean, this is a serious chapter. I'm sad myself to think of Patroclus gone. So we will see what Achilles does next time, because this next chapter is called Vengeance for Patroclus, which is kind of another word for revenge. So we'll see what happens here. All right, adios, guys. Here's to a good weekend or whatever day it is for you right now. Bye.